President Trump is expected to sign an executive order later today that would call for shutting down the Department of Education. According to the White House, Trump will hold an event with Education Secretary Linda McMahon and direct her to, quote, take all necessary steps to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education and return education authority to the states. To be clear, the president does not actually have the power to formally close the department by himself. That would require an act of Congress. However, Trump can make it nearly impossible for department employees to carry out their work, as shown by McMahon's recent move to cut its workforce in half. With a budget of roughly $270 billion, the Education Department is one of the smallest cabinet-level departments, representing just 4% of the U.S. budget. The department does not dictate what is taught in classrooms. It does, however, oversee how federal money is distributed to schools with high rates of impoverished students and children with disabilities. In addition, the department oversees roughly $1.6 trillion in student loans, which was a big issue in the Biden administration. So here we go. We can move to the next story unless
somebody like to talk.
Anybody have a feeling about this?
Well, as you know, it's not a new idea, right?
We're not shocked.
Because that's what we, like in 94, the argument was we're going to take the money and power and authority and put it as close to the classrooms as possible. This is an old idea. The Department of Education started, I think, in 1979. In 1980, Ronald Reagan immediately said, let's keep education on state levels and local levels, and again, push as much money, power, and authority there. We've just seen, though, over the past 40 years that actually some coordination from Washington works. And conservative George W. Bush actually was very effective pushing standards that a lot of people in the education establishment didn't like. But by doing that from Washington, D.C., you actually did get scores that went up. While, again, a lot of people in the education establishment were kicking and screaming. And on top of that, they're just, we have learned, a lot of states can't even be trusted to take Medicaid. A lot of governors can't even be trusted to take Medicaid, to take care of their poorest, to take care of middle-class families.
Before we get to the states, I think it's been so erratic and rash the way they've been making these cuts that you have to wonder if this is the proper. You have to question this.
Right. I will say, though, this has been a conservative goal, like you said, and an idea for a very long time. But what we found over the years is, again, the idea always was give the money, the power, the authority to the states. They would do the right things for their individual states, legislative laboratories. That's just not happening now, especially, again, I use Medicaid as a perfect example, where you have middle-class Americans in rural America who are watching their hospitals shut down, their nursing homes shut down. 50% of kids in rural America get their health care from Medicaid. And so if you're going to slash funding for Medicaid to impress your base, I can't even imagine what you're going to do with education.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the modern incarnation of cutting this, they are revealing something to citizens, which is they don't want the most educated citizenry possible because it's not helpful to them. People who can read and understand that climate change is happening are not favorable voters for them. People who can read and understand what they're doing to Medicaid, to Social Security, what Elon Musk is doing, the better your reading comprehension is, the more you might not like what this administration is doing. So an educated citizenry is not in their interest, and they're coming for it.
It really goes to the divide, John, of MAGA, the MAGA world. And the divide is the populist vision, right? Yeah. And that populist vision is we're going to help working Americans. We're going to help people that elites have looked past. We're going to help them move up to the middle class, help them become more successful, versus Steve Bannon's side, sort of the technocrats, the billionaire technocrats that really are running this. And so you do have the Steve Bannon versus the Elon Musk, basically civil war going on inside of MAGA. And this is an example, again, of just what Annan said, which is, slash, cut, don't even think twice about who you're hurting, what working class Americans in red state America, blue state America you're hurting.
I mean, I think if you went back to your crowd in 94 and people who were in favor of eliminating the Department of Education, a lot of people had various critiques that were leveled against the Republican Revolution back then. But the notion of like a new federalism applied in a kind of a somewhat philosophically coherent way was like a defensible idea, right? If you walk around where the guy who's in charge of the whole thing is like brandishing a chainsaw and is indiscriminate across all of these agencies, as Elon Musk has been, it raises the question of whether, to Mika's point before, about whether this is a thing that's in line with some real philosophical way of thinking about how to spend money on the national level, or it's just kind of in another, it looks like an easy target, basically. And I think to your point about the politics of this, and this is where, if Steve Bannon were here at the table, there's no one in the MAGA movement who's more aware of the number of MAGA voters who are on Medicaid, and that the kind of the classic, the typical stereotype of a lot of right-wing media, which is, this is an inner city program for a lot of Democratic voters, most of them who are either black or brown, is just not true. Right. If you look at the map of congressional districts and look at who Medicaid affects, that is the political buzzsaw that they're walking into. And one of the interesting questions going forward is how they're going to try to deal with that. What Bannon would say is we need to take a chainsaw to the Defense Department, because we can then sort of say that's, we're taking, and we're pouring our own ox. We're also going to cut Medicaid, but without that,
we're not going to cut taxes for billionaires and multinational tech companies. He would say that as well. And there's and we won't fight foreign wars. There's a big chunk of sort of the MAGA world that's there. But the people that are running it could not be, they're billionaires. And they're disconnected. I mean, Elon Musk so radically disconnected. He doesn't, ask Elon Musk. So how does this work when you let Florida or Utah or Ohio run education? When we were talking about it, if you had asked Jeb Bush, how's it work? Jeb would say, well, here's what we're doing in Florida. If you ask Mitt Romney in Utah, how would you use this money? He'd say, this is what we're doing. George Voinovich in Ohio, they'd go down the list. That's just a different world. That's a different age. That's a different century. What we're seeing with Elon Musk is cuts by chainsaw. There is no method to the madness. It's just cut first and hurt Americans later. That's what's happening. And by the way, as the biggest defense hawk, as the biggest budget hawk of anybody I certainly see in Washington, D.C., because I was there when we balanced the budget 4 years in a row, these cuts will not do anything to balance the budget if you're not willing to say no to tax cuts for billionaires and multinational corporations, if you're not willing to cut at the Pentagon, if you're not willing to look at wealthier Americans with Social Security and start talking about means testing. Millionaires needing Social Security, billionaires needing social. Come on, it's ridiculous. But they're not going to talk about that. They're going to go after food programs for poor kids. They're going to take breakfast and lunch away from poor kids. But they will not take tax cuts away from billionaires. If you're the Democratic Party, I just got to say, if you're the Democratic Party and you can't win, please. Go sell used cars, because you're in the wrong business.
Yeah, and that tax cut
John O'Neill, what say you?
Yes, let me chime in.
Under 15 minutes today before Joe started banging the table.
He's ready.
Right.
The tax cut fight obviously is what's on the horizon. That's what the Trump team is building towards. You're right. Musk is cutting so fast and so indiscriminately that not only has he had to say, okay, well, we've made some mistakes, but some of the highest people in the administration have. J.D. Vance over the weekend was like, yes, Musk has made some errors here. There are some government workers who do good jobs. We want them to stay. So that's the world of chaos that is enveloping all these decisions, including ones that are a longer held conservative priority, like eliminating the Department of Education. And there's a real sense here of what happens when this goes back to the states, particularly for students who have learning disabilities, who have learning challenges, special needs students. Those are the ones who may suffer here without these protections. And what's also, let's think of the timing here. We're coming out of a period of extraordinary learning loss because of COVID and because of remote schooling. Right. And now potentially you're setting the education systems across this country into more disruptive times.
At the worst
Who knows
time.
how that will affect
At the
students?
worst
Exactly right.
possible.
And by the way, this brings it all the way back to how we came in the show when you had Harriet Hageman, the congressman in Laramie, Wyoming, getting screamed at, loudly booed with chants of deport Elon Musk from her Republican audience, people in that room. That's what happens when you cut 20% of the VA. That's what happens when you cut 50% of the Department of Education on. And that's what happens when you talk about cutting Medicaid. These are real cuts that impact real people's lives, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. And every time we see one of these Republican town halls, they have an excuse. They say, well, they're bussing in Democrats to yell at us. At some point, you can't say that when it's town hall after town hall of your voters, of your constituents screaming at you.
Yeah, and it's March 20th. We're exactly 2 months into this administration. And I actually think, from my point of view, there's something
We all take a deep breath. We're only 2 months.
Isn't that
in.
crazy? It's also the spring equinox, so that's good.
That's right.
Okay, well, that's fun. All right, go ahead.
2 months in.
That was a body blow.
I need a paper stack.
Yeah.
We're 2 months in, but we're 6 years older. The math is incredibly weird. I had black hair in January.
Where's Rod Sterling? This is a Twilight Zone. Yeah. Exactly.
But 2 months in, I think we can take a little bit of stock. And the one hopeful thing, because I think people out there need some measure of hope, is that they could have run a playbook that we've seen throughout history in other countries of a very popular authoritarianism. Right? They could have stuck to the stuff that people are thirsting for, even if it's illegal, but this is not that. They are centering a bunch of things that are extremely unpopular. This is like layoff authoritarianism, right? This is cutting rural hospitals authoritarianism. This is cutting the VA authoritarianism. Yeah. So it's a very weird thing where this is the world's richest man marauding with a chainsaw authoritarianism.
A chainsaw.
A chainsaw.
I mean, he gave
Again,
the
I say again to
he
Democrats.
just gave up that visual
I
so
swear to God,
easily.
if I'm a Democratic congressman, I've already cut my ads.